please take your seats for this exciting session on psychological needs and values, tensions in design engineering. What we'll do is each speaker will speak for about 25 minutes, hopefully, and then have 5 minutes for questions. And I'll pop up with a mic. If you have a question, I'll run over just so we can get a good recording of everything. Our speakers today are Rafael Calvo and Lean Harrens. Rafael Calvo from the Imperial College of London at the Dyson Institute. Is that correct? Okay. The Dyson Institute is a Star Trek thing, I think. I wish it was called the Dyson Institute. And Lean Harrens from Ghent University. And Dr. Calvo will go first.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and seeing so many colleagues and so forth. I decided to make a talk not so much about our current research. I was lucky that Richard talked a little bit about it yesterday or early this morning. I thought I will make it a little bit more personal, at least to start with. This is related to what Shannon said in the introduction talk this morning, and how SDT is really connected to every aspect of our life. No, at least that's what I have found. So I work in the Dyson School of Design Engineering. I won't get into the details of what design engineering is, but you can imagine it's a combination of design practice and engineering thinking, developing systems, developing products. So I will share a little bit about my personal life story because I think it communicates or might tell you a little bit about the values with which I come to my design engineering work. So I was born in the US, but I grew up in Venezuela. My parents had to be exiled from Argentina in the 70s. There was a dictatorship from the right wing, if you want. My wife's family, on the other hand, was exiled from Cuba. So extreme opposites, and we ended up with somewhat similar life stories, if you want. In both cases, families were not necessarily escaping potential physical harm or death, as many of our friends and family did, but it was seeking autonomy. That's how I ended up seeing after, 50-something years around. They were escaping autocratic governments in the middle of the Cold War, and I will come back to that part of the story towards the end, seeking autonomy. Now, I've had teenage kids, and as such, as a parent, we keep questioning how we can support them to flourish. And the essence of that aspect is looking for ways in supporting their sense of autonomy. And we might do a lot of theory here, but in practice, I find it, at least as parent, it's much harder to understand ways in supporting autonomy. So, but of course, I've been doing research before being a parent, and from the beginning, we had a very clear vision in my lab, that is that all technologies should be designed to support psychological well-being. And in that process, we develop models, theoretical models like the one Richard mentioned earlier, like methods. We develop methods both for evaluating the impact that a technology has on people's psychological well-being and motivation. And we build a body of evidence from practice, from developing products that people use. So this all started when we were writing a book called Positive Computing. And in this book, we did a survey of the ways in which technology designers had been supporting well-being, from motivation to mindfulness and different approaches. And of course, while writing that book, we came across SDT and the basic psychological needs of competence, relatedness, and autonomy. I won't get into the details of that. And for the incredible good luck that I go one day on a dinner party to a friend's house in Sydney, and there is Miriam and Rich and Ed, and I got to meet with them and started working when they moved to Sydney. And over the years, I have understood better how SDT connects to ethics generally. So here you have the biomedical ethics principles, the 4 principles of well-being: human autonomy, do no harm, and justice and fairness. Every doctor, every nurse, every biomedical engineer has to fulfill or follow these basic principles. But my work, I develop intelligent systems, basically systems, software platforms that use AI for health and education purposes. And in AI, the reviews have shown that most of the principles, there is like 125 principles or set of principles, converge to these 4, to these biomedical ethics. So this tells you how important the work we do in SDT is for AI ethics and other types of ethics. So our focus has been on those 2. Now, for you to understand how we see our work, here designers create the environments we live in, environments that support or hinder well-being. So in that context, when I'm designing intelligent systems for dementia, for asthma, for insomnia, mental health, etc., we think about it in ways in which we can support these psychological needs. And we are doing this by looking at the research, and we developed the platforms, and we took designers in technology companies who build products, so it's not just our products, but other people's products, and we bring them together in toolkits and frameworks that designers can use. One of these is the Design for Wellbeing workshop, originally developed by Dorian Peters, and now by Fangshu Yu. And we are translating these workshops to multiple languages. It's being used in Sweden, in China, and we talk with dozens of designers looking at how they can introduce these concepts that we have in the SDT community into practice, into the design practice. So autonomy, and I'm going to talk only about autonomy here, we know it's about endorsement and willingness to engage in a particular behavior. It has to do with alignment that we see or users see with their own values and goals. So when I go to do a user research study of how people interact with the technology, if the autonomy is being frustrated, these are the sort of statements I hear. It won't do what I want it to do. I hate when it does that. It's too restrictive. It doesn't fit my situation. This is the sort of statements that people will express when they're frustrated. But we want to support their autonomy, so examples will be, for example, notification settings. Notifications can be very frustrating because they interrupt what we're doing to push or ask us to engage in other behaviors. So mobile phones have now notification settings that allow us to be in control of those situations. Or the other one, it's when you subscribe to a magazine, a journal, or a service like Netflix, you should be able to unsubscribe, no? And that gives you a sense of control. And if you make it clear from the beginning of the engagement, people are more likely to engage. So frustration comes from technologies that feel controlling, that feel manipulative, intrusive, nagging, inflexible, surveillance, especially when it's not clear the reason we are being surveilled. All these things frustrate our need for autonomy. And we have been working on, or Dorian Peters in particular, developed heuristics that make it easier for designers to incorporate basic psychological needs on how to, for example, increase accessibility or usability or providing different meaningful choices. These sort of principles, some of them come from the traditional user experience or design literature, and some of them are more directly coming out of the self-determination theory. Now, what we notice in technology design is that there are different spheres, we call them, of experience. So the first one, adoption, are all the preconceptions that we have about a particular technology. So if I buy a mobile phone, I might think, well, I'm going to buy an Apple phone because I feel that it's easier to use. I have preconceptions about the sense of competence that I will feel with that particular technology. And this adoption, obviously, these preconceptions will come out of marketing or will come out of word of mouth or through other means. Then we have the interface. The ones in the yellow sphere refer to the ways in which we interact with the technology. The adoption happens before we even touch the device. Then we have the interface. This is when we start touching, and this is literally the buttons, the options that the technology is offering. So technology can be very engaging and psychologically needs supportive. For example, a game that allows us to customize the way we interact with it, allows us to create personas, different ways. So the interface has the right options. But of course, the interface doesn't give me the big picture about the tasks that sometimes I have to engage in. So if I have a tool like a pedometer on my mobile phone, it will count the number of steps I walk. That type of tasks that are not necessarily the end goal could be autonomy supportive or frustrating. So that's a different sphere. Behavior refers to the things that are motivating us to engage with the technology. So if I use something like an app for health or for mindfulness, I might be trying to improve my well-being, my health. Therefore, the behavior that I'm engaging in has to do with that particular goal. The tasks are not the end goal that I'm aiming for. Life refers to all the stuff that happens beyond the technology. So I might be engaging with doing more exercise, and that allows me to feel better in life. And finally, society refers to the impact that technology has on all the people that are not using the technology. Even if I decide not to use WhatsApp or Facebook, the technology is going to have an impact on my family members or people beyond myself, right? So it doesn't matter if I use it or not, the impact on society will be there. So this is what we call the methods model, motivation, engagement, and thriving. You can find the scales and other evidence in the papers. More recently, just last week, we published a new study with Richard and Dorian, looking at scales on 4 different technologies and updating the scales to find stronger psychometric properties. We look at Facebook, TikTok, Moodle, and Blackboard. So 2 pairs of technologies related to different activities in life. So we were looking at behaviors. One of them could be like entertainment, while the other one is about learning. And then looking at the different spheres within these 2 sets of technologies. Now, the focus I wanted to bring to this talk wasn't so much about this type of work, but how this has an impact on ethics, particularly around AI. And this is a topic that has become very prominent nowadays, especially after the release of ChatGPT recently. But it's something that has been around since the 1960s. So this is Joseph Weizenbaum. He was maybe one of the first researchers, scholars, questioning issues around AI ethics. So he created a chatbot and was concerned about how people will were perceiving the chatbot as another human, attributing properties that he thought were not appropriate for a computer to have. And he made a distinction between deciding versus choosing. So deciding is logical and computational and can be programmed. It's okay to create decision support systems, technologies that allow us to make decisions about behaviors or about how we treat others, etc. But it's about deciding. Choosing is related to motivation, brings your personal values and judgments, and that, he argued, is something we should not pass on to computers. That should be left only to humans. So this is an issue that has become very big, with not just ChatGPT. So here I have examples of Alexa devices that recognize emotions, and people concerned about the impact they has on themselves. And I think the elephant in the room here is autonomy. The biggest issue, ethical issue in our AI today, at least for me, is how do we support human autonomy? If you ask most of my engineering colleagues, the only concern they have is about computer autonomy. In fact, you go to Google Scholar and you type about autonomy, and you will see that most of the papers about technology and autonomy refer to autonomous systems, basically. And the main issues will be issues about autonomous weapons or autonomous decision-making of computers, who, like the trolley problem, where the computer is making a moral decision. It doesn't talk about the impact they have on human autonomy. Having said that, politicians are talking regularly about this issue. If you read in the news, you will see politicians and regulators constantly saying AI could end up controlling us. We should stop, pause researching the topic, see how we are managing this, and then move on. The thing here is that the definition of autonomy for all these examples that I'm showing here, for example, Elon Musk saying that AI is going to control humanity, and then we have the Apple co-founder also saying that it will control humans. But what do they mean by control or autonomy is not always clear. So in human-computer interaction, there is about 30 years of research into this topic. A literature review recently showed 160 papers. That is not that much for a very large community in human-computer interaction. And there are a number of definitions there. One refers to the implicit experience that our actions are responsible for outcomes. The material influence we have on a situation, the experience that outcomes are congruent with our values. So all of those sound relevant, at least connected, I think, to the SDT literature. But the spread is just too big. There is no way of measuring autonomy that designers regularly use. So this has created a problem for policymakers. Policymakers who are very concerned about the impact of AI on human autonomy or human well-being are trying to introduce legislation like the forthcoming AI Act. So the AI Act, the European AI Act that will come out June, July this year, will put forward fines of 6% of the global revenues of a company. So you're talking for companies like Google and Facebook, etc., in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. And they have a system here that describes an acceptable risk, high risk, low or no risk. An acceptable risk, the cases that are prohibited, refer mostly about surveillance for applications that are not security or some health situations. So technically only governments will be able to do extensive surveillance. most cases, most technologies will fall in what they call high risk, that are permitted uses, but must comply with a number of legislations. And these particularly focus on things like autonomy. And then very few things will be low risk or no risk. No, anything that changes people's behavior will fall into the high risk. So you can imagine any recommendation system, every time you go to a search engine or to Amazon to do your shopping, that will be considered high risk. So we have developed processes. This is what design researchers often do, is looking at processes in which we can create technologies in a repeatable fashion, introducing ethics or well-being considerations. So you can read the paper, the citations there. And this is the double diamond. The double diamond starts with generative ideas and converging ideas about the problem. Now, the insights stage, research and insight stage, refer to understanding the problem. This community here, the SDT conference, you guys are the perfect collaborators for designers to work in this area, because the understanding of autonomy and psychological needs more generally come at this stage. We, or you guys, can help designers understand the problem very well. Then ideation is understanding possible solutions. Once we understand the problem, we can build 10 prototypes of this solution, show it to people, and start looking at which ones of these prototypes are the most effective, the most engaging, and so forth. But for the first diamond, I think this community is particularly good. And we have added, this is not part of the double diamond, we have added the evaluation stage. The evaluation stage is once the product is out there, once you release a new Facebook, a new Instagram, etc., how do we evaluate the impact that it's having on people? How do we know that it's producing harm or is supporting well-being? And this is another area where the SDT community can contribute through the quantitative methods, scales that have been developed here. So I think we have a lot to do in this space in technology design in the SDT community. Another conversation that I have found most useful, and this goes back to my first slide and about the debate of the Cold War, is a debate that Carl Rogers and Skinner had in 1962. You can find the recording on YouTube. It's really, really interesting. Two amazing guys, the two maybe most famous psychologists before Rich and Ed, these two guys here, and they live at a period that was very similar to what we have today, where there were extremely different perspectives of society, of what science, in this case behavioral science, should be contributing to issues of politics and education and so forth. So they have a very deep discussion, very nuanced, about what it means to do behavioral science and psychology, and how the work of psychologists can be helpful to improve it. So I strongly recommend this talk. So to conclude, I think behavioral science, this is the statement that B.F. Skinner uses to finish in the debate. Behavioral science will help us get to the society we want through planning. It will be missed opportunity if we did not use it so. Now, I think a question for us to ask, a question that I ask constantly to myself is advanced technology getting us to the society we want? Is a planned society really what we want? It's something that I ask myself quite often. And to conclude, I think that the way to make a decision about this is a statement by Kant that was also mentioned earlier today in the morality workshop. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end. So when we design technologies for stakeholders, I think the key, the essence of making ethical decisions is that the people we develop for should be considered an individual in themselves, in a goal in themselves. They shouldn't be an instrument to something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafa. We have time for a couple questions. Anybody have a question? Questions? One's formulating. There it is.
Hello. I just wrote it down. So you were talking about the release of software that's kind of ubiquitous, like Facebook and Instagram. But I don't work on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm interested. So is it useful when we're releasing software to a smaller number of people, perhaps like something that they're going to use all the time at work or that kind of thing? Is there any differences that we should be aware of between like something that's pervasive in your life and just something that is only used at work, for example?
Yes. Well, the design process starts much earlier, right? So even before it's released, even to a small group, first is conceptualized, it's ideated. And that stage already, designers have their own lived experience and they will be able to start relating to users, to stakeholders, and identifying what will be good for you or not. Sometimes they will have pressures from the business model, but they already have an understanding. So some of our projects are targeted to improving that aspect. The second one, that is the one you're referring, is when we release prototypes, right? So it's a standard practice in companies that you will release beta products, testing products, and you release it to a small group cohort, and then you see what is the impact. Do they find it useful? How can we improve it? And so forth. So that's a standard practice. What they don't do in a standard fashion is to take account well-being. So they look at engagement, that is the short-term impact the technology has. They don't necessarily look into the impact it might have in the longer-term use. To be fair, it's a very hard task. It's a very hard task, and there are philosophical issues also. Should companies be doing that? Is that responsibility of companies, or is it responsibility of legislators and so forth? I do know, for example, when they were planning to release OpenGPT, ChatGPT, they suspended it for like a year because they were concerned about the impact that it will have, and that was GPT-3, I think. So they would only release it to a very small number of people. The issues of misinformation and so forth. So all those technologies, generally companies release it to small groups of people first, and then more widely. Yeah? What we have to be able to make a case is that we have the tools, the instruments that they can use to be able to anticipate, have hypotheses about the impact that technology will have in the longer term.
Okay, thanks very much, Rafa.